Chapter 2. John and I were instantly obsessed with Purple Rain. We played the album for months in our room with the soundtrack blaring. I was always Apollonia, minus the boobs, because I was a girly girl, but brave, like Prince's love interest in the movie. Jan was learning to play guitar, so she wanted to be Wendy. Or maybe she had a crush on Wendy and didn't know yet how to articulate that. But her best friend also wanted to be Wendy, so it often devolved to an argument. I am Wendy. You're not Wendy. I am. Eventually, for the sake of world peace, I'd intercept and tell Jan, you can't be Wendy. Your hair's not long enough. Be Lisa. Lisa's just as cool. I funded the soundtrack purchase with my belly dancing money, and we begged to see the movie again. We loved the music, the power of Prince's performances, of course, and the style. The style, the style. Even an elementary school kid couldn't miss it. I mean, look at the fashion in this film. Prince's ruffles, the motorcycle studs, the Wonder Bra convenient leather motorcycle jacket that Apollonia strips off at not Lake Minnetonka. Years later, I would stand in awe of the full costume crew who worked in a large, brightly lit space at Paisley Park. Prince's office occupied the left wing of the top floor, and wardrobe occupied the right. Pattern makers and cutters worked on long wooden work tables under broad skylights. Seamstresses and tailors fit clothing on mannequins with Prince's body size. A stitching tailor perfected the smallest details, and the high priestess overseeing the whole operation tweaked and approved every outfit, making a sleeve a half-inch longer or exchanging a silver button for a gold one. You knew you were walking out with something one of a kind and perfectly on point. These were Prince's clothes for every day, not just performing. When I was his wife, I wore his clothes and swiped his custom-made pajamas. And when I was pregnant, wardrobe made me several cute maternity dresses with the word baby and an arrow pointing down at my belly. He had hundreds of outfits that were meticulously made, right down to the zipper pulls, which were always special and unique. He had a lot of input in the design process. He'd tear pages from magazines and instruct the designer to recreate the bodice detail from this dress and the cuff from that shirt and a collar from something Errol Flynn wore in Captain Blood. Inspired by the movie Amadeus, he had the wardrobe staff create extravagant performance pieces in velvet and lace. The Philadelphia story inspired great coats and big-shouldered suits. The wardrobe staff was incredibly talented, an amazing group of people who loved Prince and loved doing what they did. Fabulous clothes were constantly being created and recreated, vamped and revamped, altered, tailored, embroidered, and deconstructed for video shoots, performances, or just moving around in real life. There was no casual Friday at Paisley Park. Prince expected us to come dressed to play, and these amazing people helped make that possible for me. They also made it possible for my husband to steal my clothes, and not in a good way. If I bought a pair of amazingly cool tailored pants or a hot jacket, he'd take them to wardrobe, have the pants hemmed up, and tell them to put shoulder pads in the jacket so he could wear them. A few days later, I'd pull on my brand new pants, find them 2 inches too short, and say, "Hey, why are my pants shrinking?" He thought this was hilarious, and somehow he rocked these outfits just as well as I would have. The music in Purple Rain defined the summer of 1984. I spent dozens of hours dancing to it on my grandmother's tile floor. In Puerto Rico and back home, the singles When Doves Cry, Let's Go Crazy, and the rest dominated radio and MTV. Prince was now a bona fide superstar. You'd hear that opening vocal grind from Doves as people washed their cars. I Would Die For You banged from open windows as you walked down the street. The music spoke to me, certainly. But beyond that was the emotional impact of something very intimate Prince was able to share in Purple Rain. What it is for a child to witness a psychological warfare between his parents. This was something that I could definitely relate to, something that connected him and me in that moment and later on, when we envisioned the sort of parents we wanted to be. We both loved our parents, but we wanted to break that cycle of crazy dysfunctional behavior. We wanted to be a united front, committed to loving each other and creating a tight, semi-traditional family unit. This vision of family is a world away from the kid climbing the window of his basement sanctuary. But throughout the movie and the music, you can feel his yearning for it. I watched Prince's very first television interview, not counting one painfully awkward American Bandstand moment when he was 19, on a bootlegged MTV tape Grandma Nellie recorded in 1985, the year after Purple Rain. It seems unthinkable in the present age of social media. Everyone has their platform, and fans expect to be fed a steady stream of witty banter and smiling selfies. He had a belly dancer's sense of mystery. He said everything he wanted to say through his music. So this MTV interview was a huge deal. All eyes were on Prince, who was famously reclusive, shrouded in Victorian lace and artistic mystery. I watched the tape over and over until I could practically recite it word for word. First, the VJ introduces him, explains that the questions were being asked by his manager, and says, "Now Prince is not alone here. The interview was shot at the filming of his new video, America," and a bunch of other stuff I'd try to fast forward through until the video cuts to a vision of Prince looking excited, innocent, and fresh. He's surrounded by his castmates, friends, and dancers, like a landscaper sitting in the middle of a rose garden. Oh, how I envied those dancers. They sat there with serious expressions and big 80s hair and consciously casual clothes, hardly breathing, hanging on to his every word. Prince wore a ruffled white shirt with a tawny tweed greatcoat, that same tasteful dash of eyeliner that works so well for Amir, and a perfect mole in exactly the right place on his cheek. I loved that mole most of all. He spoke softly, deliberately, choosing his words as quietly and carefully as I would later hear him choose the lyrics of a song. Long after I became one of those dancers, when I was his wife and his baby was doing slow stretches and bicycle kicks in my belly, I'd wake up and hear him at the piano. I'd pull the sheet off the bed and wrap it around myself like a sari and sit on the piano bench next to him while he found what he was looking for. You see a more formal version of that understated search for words when you watch that MTV interview. He's so young. It makes me ache to look at him. Our son would be almost that same age now, with his father's full lips and dark eyes, and I like to think he would have been as thoughtful about expressing himself. One thing I'd like to say is that I don't live in a prison, he says, and I'm not afraid of anything. I haven't built any walls around myself. I'm just like anyone else. I need love and water, and I really don't consider myself a superstar. I live in a small town, and I always will, because I can walk around and be me. And he shrugs his shoulders inside the oversized coat and laughs a little. That's all I want to be. That's all I ever tried to be. I didn't know what was going to happen. I just tried to do my best, and somebody dug it, and... He purses his lips and finishes the thought with an air kiss, assigning his remarkable existence to the kiss of fate. He goes on to talk about how James Brown influenced his style, but when he's asked how he feels about people comparing him to Jimi Hendrix, he says, "A lot had to do with, I could say, the color of my skin, and that's not where it's at all. It really isn't. Hendrix was very good, but there'll never be another one like him, and it would be a pity to try. I strive for originality in my work, and hopefully it'll be perceived that way." The interviewer says, "Some people have criticized you for selling out to the white rock audience with Purple Rain and leaving your black listeners behind. How do you respond to that?" At first, Prince clowns around. Come on. Cufflinks like this cost money, okay? I mean, let's be frank. Can we be frank? If we can't be nothing else, we might as well be frank, okay?" But then he says, "Seriously, I was brought up in a black and white world, and yes, black and white, night and day, rich and poor. Black and white. And I listened to all kinds of music when I was young. And when I was younger, I always said that one day I was going to play all kinds of music and not be judged for the color of my skin, but the quality of my work. And hopefully that'll continue. I think there are a lot out there that understand this. They support me in my habits, and I support them in theirs." I find it interesting in retrospect that he felt compelled to end this interview by saying, "I believe in God. There's only one God, and I believe in the afterworld, and hopefully we'll all see it. I have been accused of a lot of things contrary to this, and I just want people to know that I'm very sincere in my beliefs. I pray every night, and I don't ask for much. I just say thank you. I'm going to marry Prince, I told my mother. Or Luis Miguel. She laughed, but I was completely serious. This wasn't just a teenager's someday my prince will come fantasy or the fact that I genuinely had a thing for guys with green eyes. This was a plain-spoken certainty I felt. I had absolutely no logical reason to think that this was remotely possible, but I had seen it in my mind's eye, or perhaps remembered it from that soul spiral, all possibilities at all times, and I knew it would happen. Years later, this sort of premonition would be a reoccurring theme between Prince and me. I'd feel something in the air when he was about to call. Somehow the mailbox had a different personality when there was a letter from Prince in it. I remember watching a television special on Herb Ritts when I was a teenager, and I thought, I'm going to shoot with him. It was odd that I saw this at all because we were living in a military base in Germany. There was only one TV channel, and this wasn't the type of thing we usually saw on it. A day or two later, Prince called and said, "Want to come to Minneapolis and shoot some pictures for Vogue?" "Who's a photographer?" I asked. "Herb Ritts." I felt that small, satisfying ping you get when synchronicity happens. This sort of thing came up all the time, and we'd laugh about it. We didn't find it spooky or illogical at all, and we never felt the need to validate it or prove it to ourselves or to anyone else. We simply accepted it as coincidence or fate, just a little shout-out from the universe, reminding us that we were exactly where God wanted us to be. But there have been other times, moments when God seems blind and everything in the universe feels hopelessly out of sync. In the midst of the Purple Rain craze, my parents officially divorced and Daddy was transferred to Wiesbaden Army Airfield in Germany. It was decided that Jen and I would move to Maryland with Mama. Her boyfriend had already moved there. They rented a big, lovely house. "Your room is painted pink," Mama told me. "You've always wanted a pink room, right?" I felt more miserable every time she told us how great it would be. Daddy drove us to Maryland where we joined Mama's boyfriend, a white guy with white hair, which threw me for a loop somehow. When it was time for Daddy to leave, Jen and I stood there at the door with our arms tied around him, not wanting to let go. And Mama stood there with big tears rolling down her face. She was clearly every bit as distraught as we were. She loved him. He loved her, I told Prince years later. Why? Why was that not enough? He had no answer. But now I think back on that moment in Purple Rain when the kid's father turns to his mother with reproachful tears in his eyes and says, "I would die for you." He thinks it's the ultimate sacrifice, but in truth, it's living for someone that presents the far greater challenge. I sat in my pink room in Maryland not knowing what to do with myself. I was 12 years old and I'd been dancing professionally for more than half my life. Now we were far away from the places that hired me on a regular basis, and even if Mama had scoped out the gigs, I didn't have Daddy to drive me there and manage the sound and play the tablas and just be Daddy. When my parents lived together, they fought like cats and dogs, but they'd done pretty well as a separate but equal team, going along on parallel tracks with John and me securely between them. Mama didn't have loud shouting matches with the white guy. If there was some disagreement between them, they'd go into the room they shared and shut the door. When Mama and Daddy argued, I'd be hunkered down in a corner eavesdropping, taking in every word. But I didn't even want to know what Mama and her boyfriend were saying to each other in those low, intense voices. It seemed so unnatural. Mama is Puerto Rican to the 10th power. To me, she's always embodied the vibrant, loud voice of that culture. I didn't want her to tone that down for anyone. Right away, Mama researched all the dance studios and companies in the area and decided I should take classes at the prestigious Washington School of Ballet, where Shirley MacLaine and Goldie Hawn had studied. Under the umbrella of the Washington Ballet, WSB accepted a limited number of students who were expected to work hard, be diligent about the bar, and serious about classical studies, all of which I craved. It was expensive and not terribly convenient, about 90 minutes away on Wisconsin Avenue in Washington, D.C. But Mama thought it was the best place for me. She took off work early so she could take me there 3 times a week. Belly dancing has always been my thing, personally and professionally, but I was a ballerina first. Dance for me began with ballet class, and I've always stayed grounded in it. When I wasn't at ballet, I stayed in my room, reading and dancing. My home situation was enormously depressing, and I got off the school bus one day to discover I'd gotten my first period. Awesome, right? I was already dragging through the most awkward school year of my life. Now I was in the throes of puberty as well, the only non-white kid in my class, and the only girl in gym class who wasn't allowed to wear makeup or shave her legs no matter how I begged. I absorbed several weeks of taunting and teasing. You could braid that hair on your legs, and that sort of thing. And then I decided to take matters into my own hands. I'd seen Mama use Nair on her upper lip. So I crept into the bathroom one day after school, read the instructions on the back of the bottle, and slathered it on my legs. Within minutes, the guilt got me, and I quickly got into the tub and rinsed it off. When the dark hair washed away with it, part of me celebrated, the rest of me withered at the thought of facing Mama with my smooth, oh so wonderfully smooth, but soon-to-be broken legs. By the time she got home from work, I'd developed a strategy. Play for sympathy and try to get off on a technicality. Mama, these girls at school, you don't know what these girls are like, I said. And you told me I couldn't shave. You never said anything about Nair. She laughed. See, she did know what those girls were like. Mean girls are a force of nature that transcends geographical and cultural boundaries. I was an easy mark because I was different, and not just because of the color of my skin. I was that kid who always got hit in the face by the dodgeball ball. Instead of going to cheerleading practice and after-game parties, I went to ballet, and ballet, and ballet. Jan, meanwhile, was that girl who could play anything, volleyball, softball, soccer, or guitar, and quickly attract a posse of friends wherever she went. I felt more alone with each passing day. Jan and I really didn't interact with my mother's boyfriend at all, so I was surprised to hear him rap his knuckles on my door one afternoon. I think his intention was probably some inexpert attempt to be what, in his mind, was fatherly. Mayte, this room is a mess, he said. It's not acceptable. My dad was a military guy, too. I understood the concept of shipshape, but Jan and I had never been made to clean and do laundry as if we were in boot camp. I wasn't open to the idea that I should care whether my personal space was acceptable to someone else. So this didn't start well, and it quickly went downhill from there. I wasn't about to discuss things with him in low tones. Things escalated to a real confrontation, and I won a little Puerto Rican chica in his face. Apparently not used to being disagreed with in this way, the guy bellowed back at me, shoving me with the heel of his hand. I staggered back, stunned, and then stood in the middle of my pink room, shaking and furious. I was thinking, oh, he's in trouble now. I was too afraid to say it out loud, but there was not a shadow of doubt in my mind. Mama always had my back. He slammed the door and stormed down the hall. When I knew he was gone, I crept down to the kitchen and called my mother at work, tearfully telling her, "He put his hands on me. He is not allowed to put his hands on me." She took the story in with surprising calm, and I don't know what went on between them after that, but I never saw the guy at the house again. Within days, Jan and I were on a flight to Germany. I never even had the chance to retrieve my ballet shoes and towel bag from my locker at WSB. Mama packed our things, closed up the house, and joined us a week or two later in Heineberg, an ungated American community on a hill in Wiesbaden, where we would all live together for 6 years. Mama and Daddy's unorthodox relationship didn't seem odd to Jan and me at all. We didn't give it much thought, really. We were old enough to understand that Mama had made a huge mistake, and while we may not have had the security every child fantasizes about, we learned that mistakes aren't necessarily forever. Second chances happen. This belief stayed with me, a blessing and a curse. Thinking my husband and I would eventually remarry kept me from feeling bitter toward him, but it also prevented me from fully moving on, as long as he was alive. The summer after we moved to Germany, Jan and I went to see our grandmothers in Puerto Rico. A few weeks later, our parents showed up for the customary family visits, and while we were all hanging out one afternoon, they casually announced that they had gotten remarried. Jan and I were surprised, to say the least. What? Why? When? How could you do that without telling us? On the one hand, we were delighted that the typical child of divorce fantasy was happening to us. Our parents were back together, but the memories of the war zone were still pretty fresh. We worried that things were going to go back to the way they used to be. Mama and Daddy explained that it was just so she could be in Germany on his benefits. And weirdly, that made it okay. We knew they were never going to have the fairy tale romance. It was a relief for everyone that they didn't feel the need to pretend. They cared deeply for each other, and the piece of their relationship that worked. Our dysfunctionally functional family was worth preserving. They were willing to sacrifice some pride for it and let go of the pieces that didn't work. Life on base away from the United States was a bit of a culture shock. Because they divided the grades differently, I was outraged to find myself back in middle school while John went to General H. Arnold High School. We were free to venture out and explore the country around us, but most people seemed scared to do that. I wasn't about to be stuck at home all the time. Struggling through the language barrier that kept most of my classmates on base, I researched the schedules and took the bus into Wiesbaden, a bustling city famous for its grandly ancient architecture and natural hot springs. In Germany, the arts were highly respected and well-funded. Every town had a big theater, so I joined one and started picking up some German. Before long, I was conversational, working toward fluent. Mama searched out a challenging ballet class for me and then went around to all the Turkish and Moroccan restaurants asking, "Do you hire belly dancers?" The response was more enthusiastic than we could have imagined. Turns out, belly dancing was even more popular in Germany than it was back home. So I was soon back to a steady schedule of appearances. Mama danced too, but we were rarely at the same place at the same time. I danced at birthday parties, weddings, and corporate events. I danced at hotels, restaurants, and convention centers. I learned the difference between the Turkish customs and the Persian customs and tailored my style to accommodate the two completely different styles of dance and dress. The money rolled in. I usually got paid in cash, and for lack of a better idea, I kept tucking it into a little metal lockbox. If I wanted a book or a record or tampons, I just peeled a little off this wad of cash and tucked it away again. I was too young to understand or care about the money. I just loved dancing. So Daddy did all the bookkeeping. When I had several $1,000s sitting there under his desk, he took me to the bank to hook up my own checking account, and then the PX to write my very first check, which the cashier assumed was fake. She peered at me over her reading glasses. "Is this real?" "Oh yeah," I said. "It's my check." "Really?" "Yes!" She looked over my head at Daddy, who had gotten in line behind me, anticipating that he might have to vouch for me. Her reaction was understandable, because walking down the street, I looked like any other 12-year-old kid. In my costume and makeup, I looked older, and I was coming in as a professional, dancing at restaurants and events until 10 or 11 at night. So the people hiring me readily believed Mama when she told them I was 16. Like my first ballet teacher, they either believed it or believed I could make it work. It raised only a few eyebrows each time I celebrated another 16th birthday. "Wait," the bookers sometimes said. "Weren't you 16 last year?" No, 15 last year." Dad was always with me, nodding and smiling, backing me up. Mr. Rockefeller. He was my wingman in all things, with me at every gig. We were a little team, he and I. While I prepared, he'd get the sound and video equipment set up and assess the audience, and we'd formulate a strategy, crackling back and forth on walkie-talkies. "You've got a square dance floor, wood, the good party table's on the left." "Okay, cool. Birthday girl's 21, table 5, seated with parents, grandparents, looks like a boyfriend, a couple siblings. They've definitely had a few, but it's a family thing. They seem okay." "Thanks, Daddy." I stayed out of sight until I heard my music. Mama was adamant about that as a rule, and Prince always was too. It made Mama crazy when costume dancers strolled around and mingled with people before a performance. "Where's the mystery then?" she'd ask in a huff. "Where's the illusion? Shattered, that's where. Destroyed. Why even bother making a dramatic entrance if you've already been seen at the bar giggling with the waiters?" By the time I finally got to take my rightful place at General H. Arnold High School, the sizable chunk of money with which I started my checking account had swelled to more than 100,000, because I didn't spend much. I never did much other than go to school and dance. I did pay for my own business expenses, costumes, and dance classes. When I turned 15, I got my learner's permit and bought my first car. I could have bought myself a house if I'd wanted to. Sometimes I wish I had. After Jen started college, I shifted some cash her way whenever she needed it, and Daddy told me, "She gets an allowance, you know." I was genuinely confused. Allowance? What's that? It hadn't really occurred to me that most kids my age looked to their parents to pay for things like clothes and a car. I liked funding my own life, but the money wasn't what made me love dancing. First and foremost for me at that age was that it was fun. My good friends Stephanie and Allison loved to go with me. Free food, dancing, parties, come on. What teenage girl is going to complain about that as a lifestyle? Mama, on the other hand, was getting tired of it. I don't know if she got a little bit depressed or went through menopause or just wasn't as addicted to it as I was. But she retired, and I took over her regular gigs in addition to my own. One of my monthly favorites was Frauentag, Ladies' Day, when the Muslim men would rent out the entire restaurant for the afternoon. Cars would roll up to the front door one after another, and wives and their children, shrouded in burqas, would come inside. No men were allowed. Only the restaurant owner was on the premises, and he remained out of the main area. When all the ladies were there, the doors were locked and curtains drawn. Then they'd shed their burqas, revealing designer dresses and shoes and fabulous jewelry. They were dressed to the nines and ready to dance, drink, and party their behinds off. These ladies were polite but skeptical the first time they saw me. How could this skinny little curly-haired girl know anything about an ancient Middle Eastern dance form? That's a question I could never answer. Even when I tried to explain it to Prince, who had no problem with the idea of 1,000 lifetimes abiding in a modern body. The best I could come up with was, I don't know, it's just in my blood, in my soul. And then I told him about my little leg bones when I was born, how they were confused at first and didn't know where they belonged. Of course, Daddy couldn't go with me to Frauentag, but the venue always had a great sound system for my mixtapes. As per Mama's rule, I never allowed myself to be seen before the performance. These women understood the power of invisibility. I always started with my Wonder Woman turns, and then that fierce dancer in me would take over. During the first song, I'd play the sills as I scoped out the crowd, making a mental note of anyone who seemed particularly reserved, anyone with a frown on their face. At first, a lot of ladies would be out on the floor, but as they realized I was a real dancer, they'd sit down and watch. The second song was a ballad. Veil work, sword, backbend, something pretty and a little bit shocking, something with a lot of performance value. And then we'd pick up the tempo, get them clapping, get the drums going. By then, I knew who was into it and who was going to be shy. I'd go to the wallflowers and draw them out to dance with me, showing them that yes, they could do it. By the end of my final number, I'd won them over, and they knew how to show their appreciation, if you get my drift. Usually, I hated getting tips. On the upside, tips. On the downside, when I was little, it was always made clear up front that I was a minor, not to be touched in any way, so people threw the money on the floor, and I had to push it out of the way with my foot. After we moved to Germany, and I was suddenly 16, people started tucking bills into my costume. I hated it when a guy would approach looking all sweet and kind and then take his time tucking that bill in there, making me dodge and weave to avoid being touched. I was particularly grateful that the Frauentag ladies kept it classy, discreetly tipping me after the performance, respectfully tucking bills into my straps and hips. As I became more recognized in Germany, a variety of interesting offers started coming my way, including an invitation to come in and cut a demo at a small record company based in Frankfurt. A producer saw me dancing somewhere and was certain he could make me a star. I was definitely interested in singing and acting in addition to dancing because to be Rita Moreno, the greatest triple threat in Broadway history, is the fantasy of every Puerto Rican girl. So in I went to record my demo. Side A was a cover of Mr. Mister's Broken Wings. The B-side was Too Dramatic, a song I'd written myself. The words were something like, "Too dramatic. I don't know why, it's just the way that I am. I have purposely blocked out the rest. Just keep that much in your hip pocket because it comes up again later. I was proud of my song and excited about the opportunity, but when they decided not to sign me, I wasn't terribly upset. This wasn't the path I saw myself on at that moment. My dream was to dance in Cairo, where the top performers dance in grand hotels with 50-piece orchestras. I knew that if I worked hard enough, I could be as good as those legendary dancers. Mama agreed, but added, "You'll need the best costumes, and those can only come from Madame Abla." Madame Abla was a legend, the Coco Chanel of the belly dancing world. Dancers would make the pilgrimage to her shop in Cairo and leave with costumes that were meticulously made especially for them. Each one was unique in design and immaculate in fit. Starting when I was 14, Mama and I traveled to Egypt for 10 days every 9 months or so. The first day we'd go to Madame Abla's shop in Muhammad Ali Street, not far from Bab Zuwayla, an ancient gate that seemed to separate modern downtown Cairo from a mystic ancient world. The narrow side streets were crowded with small shops where craftspeople made and sold musical instruments. The air was filled with laughter and music. Madame Abla's shop was on the second floor of a shabby old apartment near the Museum of Islamic Art. At the top of the stairs, we'd knock on the door, and an older lady in traditional Egyptian clothing would let us in. Like stepping through the looking glass, we left the dim hallway and stepped into what might have been a Parisian salon, lavishly furnished with silk brocade sofas and embroidered ottomans. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceilings. Ornately carved bookcases held bolts of fabric and glass jars filled with every imaginable shape and size of beads and sequins. While we waited for Madame Abla, we were served gorayeba, little Egyptian cookies that melt in your mouth, and mint tea in fancy cups from a brass cart. Eventually, Madame Abla would sweep into the room and greet us, gracefully extending her arms. She wore a gracefully muted galabeya, a traditional garment for both men and women in the Nile Valley, with her hair pulled back into a perfect bun. I wanted to contribute to the design of my costumes, so I always had a folder of sketches worked up, and Madame Abla always pored over them with great interest, gracious and encouraging. Meanwhile, I'd look through pictures of her latest designs, which were displayed in large photo albums. We'd come up with a few concepts that combined my ideas with hers, select fabric swatches and beads and thread, and then she'd stand me up and look me over, complimenting me on how nicely I'd filled out since our last visit. Once I asked her, "Why don't you ever take measurements?" "I take measurements," she said, tapping her temple next to her eagle eyes. When we returned for fittings, we always found that this method was pretty accurate. It was a thrill to step out of the dressing room in one of Madame Abla's creations. We'd never had anything tailor-made. I'd never even seen my dad get fitted for a suit. Mama and Grandma Nellie had made costumes for me, and they were good at it, but I'd never had anything on this level. Madame Abla had thoughtfully placed every detail, including an ornate applique on the left hip, not the right hip, as any store-bought or hand-me-down costume would have had, because I'm a lefty, and she took the time to notice that. She fine-tuned the details that made me feel polished and complete. To see myself in the mirror, a walking work of art, gave me a sense of pride and mystique that changed the way I inhabited my body and raised my dancing to a higher plane. After the fitting, she'd tell us to come back for the finished costume in a few days. God willing. Everything was God willing. While we waited for Madame Abla to finish my costumes, Mama and I made an adventure of it. We stayed in a 5-star hotel and ate exotic food from big high-end restaurants and tiny old cubbyhole places. We made a circle of Egyptian friends, dancers, musicians, and other folk artists, and I picked up quite a lot of Arabic hanging out with them. We spent our days visiting the pyramids and markets, wandering the Grand Bazaar, drinking mint tea and more mint tea, taking in the colorful sights and exotic aromas, replenishing our supplies of essential oils and the black kohl eyeliner that is better than anything else out there. Every night we went to the hotel nightclubs to see the greatest belly dancers of the day, along with the up-and-coming dancers and musicians. In November 1989, on my 3rd annual 16th birthday, I actually turned 16. So Daddy went to Egypt with us to celebrate. That night was a special occasion at the Sheraton El Gazeta. Lucy, one of my favorite dancers, was performing, followed by Egyptian heartthrob Amri Diab, who was starting to seriously blow up then and would go on to become the best-selling Middle Eastern recording artist of all time. So this was essentially like an evening with Paula Abdul opening for a pre-Purple Rain Prince. In a club like this, the dancer comes on at 10 or 11, and the singer performs at 1 in the morning. I'd been exploring all day, but I was wide awake, dressed to the nines in a gorgeous black sequin dress, down front and center when Amri Diab made his entrance. He took a look at me, brought me up on stage, and asked me to dance. I hesitated because I felt a little overdressed, but the happy crowd cheered me on. My mother always wore a beaded scarf to add a little bling to her outfit, or so I thought back then. To this day, she actually wears it in hopes that I'll get up and dance. When I do, she quickly grabs the scarf and places it on my hips. She always has my back, my mama. She could give stage mother lessons to the best of them. I went up wearing mama's scarf over my sequin birthday dress, just dancing for myself, because it was my birthday. I was so happy and grateful to be celebrating in this amazing place. I started dancing at the side of the stage, small at first, but then I did my Wonder Woman turn and gave myself to the music and the moment and the wild response from the audience. I felt myself light up and realized, okay, it's on. I'm performing. I didn't know or care who was watching. Afterward, I was sitting with my parents already overdosing on Dream Come True when the maitre d' approached us and said the general manager of the Heliopolis Sheraton would like me to come in and audition to dance in their spectacular Nubian tent restaurant. Oh, I'm just here for costumes, I said. What time would you like her to be there? Mama asked. The next day was a mad scramble for an Egyptian agent and a borrowed costume. Madame Abla provided the latter, one with fishnet that covered my midsection, which is required by law in Egypt. I know, right? Crazy. We arrived just in time at the spectacular hotel northeast of Cairo. The lobby was a towering hall where bright-colored birds screeched from live palm trees and flew freely overhead. The audition went well, and it was agreed that I should come back in June. We picked up my costume, said goodbye to Madame Abla, and flew home to Germany. My heart was pounding with the possibilities. If the hotel offered me a contract within 18 months, I could graduate high school, get the necessary work visa, and be back in Cairo to dance alongside some of the most honored artists in the business. For the rest of my career, I'd be able to name my price anywhere in the world. For the rest of my life, I'd be able to teach as a master belly dancer, because working in Cairo at this level, that's it. You've reached the top. Back home, on a roll, I celebrated by triumphantly scoring my driver's license. I don't remember doing a traditional sort of driver's ed at all. I just got the license. My dad was head of transportation back then. I didn't ask questions. For the rest of my junior year, by night I danced and by day I hurried to class, passing a large portrait of Priscilla Presley in the school's hallway. I remember thinking how cool it was that she had been going to this very same high school when she met Elvis, not even suspecting that my life was about to change in much the same way hers had. People have tried to tell me, you lost your childhood to dancing, but I don't see it that way at all. If anything, belly dancing allowed me to hang on to my innocence a little longer than most of the girls I knew. When I was 16, I was a virgin who'd never tasted alcohol. That's about as common as a unicorn among present-day 16-year-olds. If I can give my daughter one thing, I want to give her what I got from belly dancing, a sense of myself as precious. I respected and reserved myself, for myself, not for a man. And the side effect of that was a beautiful romance with a husband who was my first, and in that moment, my everything. When I belly danced, I never saw it as a dance of seduction. I saw it as a dance of empowerment. That's what I try to give women now when I teach them to belly dance, that sense of self-confidence that can only come from within. No compliment can give it to you, no number on the scale, no label on your clothes. It radiates from a woman's core, and it's absolutely her own. I think that's what made Prince notice me. I wasn't on stage to turn anyone on. I was there to practice this ancient dance form and make it my own. That's exactly what he wanted for every artist he worked with. Prince was a master at bringing out the best in people, and I soaked that up during the 11 years we were together. I try to bring that to every class I teach, and I see it happening. A successful businesswoman becomes more successful as she becomes CEO of herself. A teenage girl in the media blizzard of our you can never be too skinny or too rich culture comes away with the idea that what she is right now is magical. Prince, from an early age, was a savant musician. He knew he was one of the greatest entertainers in the history of rock music, or the history of history, but he never felt the need to say it. It was just there and could not be denied. We shared a common belief that whatever you're passionate about, you should learn about it, work on it, do it, just let it go, and let it be. And that's what I do about belly dancing. The joy I felt dancing for George Michael, or for Madonna and her dancers, or for any other audience is the same joy I felt dancing on the tile floor at my grandma Mercedes's home when I was a little girl. That feeling came from within, so no one could take it away from me. I knew I was good, and I celebrated that in a way that wasn't conceited or cocky. I was grateful for this body God had given me, grateful for the formal education Mama had fought to provide me, and grateful for every hour Daddy spent carting my gigantic boombox and speakers up the stairs to another gig. Daddy did get frustrated with me every once in a while when my grades suffered, but I remember only one occasion when he tried to get tough about it. "That's it," he declared. "You're grounded." I shrugged and told him what he already knew. "You can't ground me. I'm booked." As Mom and I made plans for our summer trip to Egypt, we received 2 pieces of terrible news. First, George Abdo called to tell Mama that Amir had died of AIDS. We were stunned by the loss of our dear flamboyant friend. I was only beginning to understand what AIDS meant, or what homosexual meant, or what sexual meant for that matter. When I think of Amir, I think of talent and kindness and laughter. I remember him sitting on the floor teaching Mama how to sew a particularly lovely pattern of beading on my sleeve. To me, he was Amir, the artist, one of the most beautiful dancers I'd ever seen. That was all, and that was more than enough. I'm grateful that I had the opportunity to know and work with him. In March, the other shoe dropped. There was a terrible fire at the Heliopolis Sheraton. The hotel was relatively new, but there were no alarms or sprinkler system. Tragically, Egyptian law didn't require those at that time. 16 people had been killed and much of the place had been destroyed. They didn't know when they'd be open for business again, or if the Nubian tent would ever be rebuilt. I wasn't upset about the money, though it would have tripled my income. It didn't even cross my mind that if I'd been there, I might have been killed. All I could see was that the dream I'd worked so hard for slipped through my fingers. It might be a year before I got another chance to dance in Egypt with an Egyptian band, and a year seemed like an eternity to my 16-year-old self. I was devastated and probably being too dramatic about it. That's just the way I am. But Daddy tried to put a positive spin on things. "You're safe. That's all that matters," he said. "We'll make the best of it. We can all go camping together in Spain." This didn't improve things for my taste, but Daddy pushed the plan forward. "Look, you've only got 1 year of high school left. Jan's going to be living in the States. After I retire, who knows where we'll be? This is probably the last family trip we'll take together." His genuine sadness about that made us feel bad, so we sheepishly got on board. I really was glad for that time with Jan, and Mama and Daddy seemed to be in a good, loving place with their relationship. Neither of them was seeing anyone else, so their fighting was at a nice, low tide. He was feeling sentimental and happy and insisted on paying for everything, which I appreciated. It made me feel like his little girl, protected and taken care of. "There's enough in the budget for 1 concert," he said. We had our choice, Celia Cruz with Tito Puente or Prince. "Prince," Jen said without hesitation. She'd seen him in Washington, D.C. on the Love Sexy tour a year earlier and was still in a fangirl haze about it. I wasn't in favor for the Prince plan, because we'd gone to see Michael Jackson with Kim Wilde during the Bad World tour, and it was a horrible experience. People were screaming and passing out, and not because they were overwhelmed by the awesome music. They genuinely could not breathe and were afraid for their lives. We were so crammed together that my feet dangled above the ground at times. I had a sweater tied around my waist and some creepy dude tried to take it off me. That put me over the edge. I punched Jen's shoulder and yelled over the shrieking crowd, "I hate you right now!" It was amazing to see Michael Jackson live, and God bless and keep Michael Jackson's music, but I did not want to repeat that scene. The Prince concert is going to be just as bad, I said. I vote Celiantito. I offered to pay for one of the concerts so I could skip Prince to hang out on the beach, but Daddy wasn't letting me open my wallet for anything. Wait, the Prince tour is called Nude? Mama raised her carefully drawn eyebrow as she read the Spanish newspaper. Oh, we're going to see Prince. That settled it.